Let me set something straight from the outset. We're not talking about excuses. There is no excuse. What we're talking about now are explanations and what you can consider in mitigation. And let's start with how Mr. Davidson got to where he is right now. Now we know from Hugh Wilburn that his family history goes way back. We don't know how many generations we're talking about, abuse and violence and addiction, but we do know that Mr. Davidson's grandmother, Darnice, had those problems. We know that she beat her children with table legs and extension cords. We know that she was an alcoholic, addicted to alcohol. We know sexual abuse in the home. Mr. Davidson's own mother, Nell, was sexually abused in that home. And we know that, like many times, that cycle goes from generation to generation. And we know that because we know the way that Nell was. Nell was addicted to crack. She was a prostitute. She was violent. And she had no business having children. Now, Dr. Brown, I think, taught us all a lot yesterday, and I think that it's important to understand that he wasn't trying to excuse any behavior of Marcus Davidson. He was trying to help us understand how he got to where he is. Let's look at this chart that he did for us again. These factors that can predict someone's going to turn out to be violent. Neglect. Now, there's no question that Marcus Davidson was neglected. Half the time, he didn't know where his mother was. She didn't maintain any control over him. You know, she didn't even know if he went to school. She didn't know if he was in the streets. She didn't know what he was doing. He had no control over him. I mean, he was as neglected, I think, as anyone could be. Rejected. Well, you know, when your mom leaves you and is gone for long periods of time, when you don't have any idea who your dad is and you think it might be somebody that's not, that's rejection. And remember, Dr. Brown talked about a fragmented family where people come and go. And how could it have been more fragmented? Men come and go in that house, in that life. The children have different fathers. Family size he talked about. And it's interesting that Nell's family size was the same as yours. And no question about the poverty that they lived in, the order of the children, he said, and remember this is important. He said if there's not a male father figure, that the oldest male is often in the worst shape. And one reason for that is that the oldest female often takes the role of mother for the children. But she's not old enough to be a mother for the oldest male. And that's important. So he didn't have any mother figure. He didn't have a mother figure. The role reversal, again, the child ends up taking care of the parent a lot of times. Marcus had to go out and steal food to feed the family. Should a child ever have to do that? Obviously not. Obviously not. But it helps explain where we are. The lack of monitoring. Well, there was no monitoring at all. No. Lack of male role model, we talked about that. know, and it's sad how often this happens, where there's just no male. I mean, I think about how important my father was to me, and to think if I'd never had him, how different would I be? Marcus Davidson never had a male role model, period, except for men that would come in and pay for sex with his mother or sell her crack cocaine. That's the only male role model that he had. He talked about violence, drugs, and crime, and the combination of those in the house. Well, if Nell is beating the kids with an extension cord, that's violence. If she's addicted to crack cocaine, that's drugs. If she's engaging in prostitution, that's crime. No question that those factors are present. School failure. Most of the time, Marcus wasn't in school, or he was sent to different schools every year. He had no opportunity to have any roots in even a school situation. The age onset and the age that it continues, and the multiple factors. Remember, Dr. Brown said, if you have multiple factors, the chances that you're going to become violent increase dramatically. And if you have all of those factors, which he did, then it's almost inevitable. You know, it's easy for lawyers like Ms. Fitzgerald and me to get up here and say we all have choices, because we were blessed with the ability to get a good career and a good education, and didn't have the start that Marcus Davidson had. Did he have any choices? In effect, I don't know that he did. According to Dr. Brown, maybe 5% of those people have any choice. So that's how he got here. That's how he got here before you. Not an excuse, but it's an explanation of why he's here. Now, what do we do? That's a decision that you've got to make, and I know that none of you wants to make it, and I don't blame you, but it's got to be made. Now, you can sentence him to death. You can sentence him to life without parole. And why would you do that? Why would you sentence him to life without parole? Well, I think some people came before you yesterday and gave you some reasons. You know, the Rudds obviously are good people. I mean, they love Marcus. He's a son. You know, they're not kidding about that. They want to do for him whatever they can. He is, in effect, their son. Alice Ray feels the same way. He is her son. It's important to them to have their son, even if he's in prison for the rest of his life. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you, is something you can consider, and consider heavily in mitigation. And I ask you to do that. Remember, Dr. Brown said that when Marcus is sober and in a structured environment, that he does well. And we don't just speculate about that, we know that. We know that because he's been in prison before. And he did well. And one of you asked, well, bottom line is, did he know right from wrong? And Dr. Brown's answer is compelling. When he is sober, he does. When he's on that cocktail mix of marijuana, cocaine, and alcohol, he does not. That's a factor that you can consider and weigh. If he's in prison for life, he's not going to be on that cocktail of addiction. He's going to be the kind of young man that the Rudds and the Rays had in their house. He's going to be the kind of young man, I submit to you, who can help other young men. And I think he will do that. And I think you can consider that as mitigation when you think about what to do in this case. You know, I wish you could have met Isabel Newell. If she were young enough, she could have come over here, but you know, she spent a lot of years teaching, and she's a no-nonsense lady. And she tutored Marcus and Matt for free. Liked him. He would do whatever she asked him to do. And remember, she said that if she had had the life he had, she might not be any different. Now, she's got a lot of wisdom with years. And I think she told you some of that wisdom yesterday, and I think you can rely on that wisdom. And you can rely again on her appreciation of Marcus. She wasn't scared of him. Jason Bramlett, very nice young man, liked Marcus a lot, had him in his wedding. Now that says a lot when you have somebody in your wedding. I mean, there are a lot of my friends, I wouldn't want my wedding if I had to. But I think that tells us a lot about Lemaricus Davidson. I tried my first death penalty case 31 years ago this month. And believe me, it hadn't gotten any easier. But in that time, I've seen the coming of laptops. I've seen cell phones, and I know Judge Baumgartner would wish cell phones go away so they quit ringing in his phone. And I've seen forensic evidence develop that we never dreamed of back then. Never dreamed of. And I'm going to ask you, if you have any lingering doubt at all, to consider what might happen next month, next year in forensics. You know, we've seen people now that have been released from death row around the country because modern science has proven them not to be guilty. They were convicted by good jurors like you, beyond a reasonable doubt. Jurors did the right thing because they knew it. But yet we find out years later we were wrong because of developments in science. And you can use any lingering doubt that you have as a mitigating factor, and I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, it's one of the most important that you can consider. I'm going to ask you to spare the life of Lemaricus Davidson. I'm going to ask you to do it for Alice Ray. I'm going to ask you to do it for Carl Rudd, Seth Rudd, for Flo Rudd. I'm going to ask you to do it for that little boy who went and told his mama he'd been sexually abused by his mother, and she was too stoned to care. I'm going to ask you to do it for that little boy who was whipped by extension cords and table legs. I'm going to ask you to do it for that little boy who waited at that courthouse where his mom was supposed to come pick him up, and she never showed up. Please, I'm begging you, do the right thing. Mr. Davidson to prison for the rest of his life. Thank you all very much.